We continue now at the top of Daf Ayin Tesam Beis in Meseches Gittin. This is Gittin Daf 79b. The Gemara now comes to the third case where Gittin is distinct. When it comes to Hilchas Gittin, it's different than when it comes to Hilchas Shabbos. V'had Amar Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel, that which Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, Lo Yamod Adam Begagze, a person should not stand on one roof, V'yiklot Megishamim Migago Shel Chavero, and then collect rainwater from the roof of his friend, the next roof, Shekishem Shediyurin Chalukin Milmata, just like we say that down below, meaning in the actual houses, we say there's different diyurin. They're considered to be different living spaces belonging to different individuals. Kach diyurin chalukin milmala. So too, when it comes up above, when it comes to the roof area, they're considered distinct rishuyos, and that's why it's a problem. But hani mili linyan Shabbos. But that's only true when it comes to Shabbos. Again, avol inyan get. But when it comes to get mishum kapedu, it all has to be with how makvid people are. V'kuli haylo kapti inshi. When it comes to two roofs that are next to one another, people are not makvid on one another. They consider that to be the same domain. Rashi explains, "V'hadamar Rav Yehuda lo yamod adam al gago v'yiklot megisham hatzafin al gago shel chavero." Again, a person can't stand on his roof and collect the rainwater from the adjacent roof. To have a motzi me rishus l'rishus. That's like taking from one domain to another, from one rishus hayachid to another. Im lo irvu, if they didn't make an eruv, that's a problem. Sha'af al pi she'ein dorim al agagos, even though they don't live on the roofs, shayach nami bu iser chilik rishus. It's still considered distinct rishuyos. Hanimili de chalukas rishuyos gagen ki rishuyos bottom linyan Shabbos. That's only true that we consider them distinct rishuyos, the roofs, just like the houses. That's only by Hilchas Shabbos. Avol begittin, but when it comes to Gittin, hayu lo shnei gagen smuchim zelazeh. Rashi says, let's say there were two roofs next to one another. Let's say the husband owned both of the roofs. V'shila makom bazel akabelas Gittin. He lent out space in one of the roofs for her to receive her get. V'kibalto bazeh, and then she received it in the other roof. Lo amrin an hacha rishuyos chalukas. We don't say it's distinct rishuyos. There we're going to say that he's not mak, but he really means to say any area, whether it's this roof or the other roof that he owns, he's lending a space, and it's going to be a good gerushin. When we said earlier that a person doesn't lend out two distinct spaces, he's only referring to one area, mishum kapedu, that just has to do with his akpada. The person's thinking of one space, he's not thinking of a separate space. Yesh mashal chatzeru makvad al beis, so meaning to say, some people will be willing to lend out a space in his chatzer, but he won't be willing to lend out a space in his house. Aval kuli hai, but to go so far to say that one roof and not another, gag and smuchin, you have two roofs next to each other, vein tashmish ragel, but no one uses the roof anyway, lo kap the inchi, so people don't care that much when it comes to that area. That's the idea of kuli hai, lo kap the inchi. And the Gemara continues, Amar Abaya says, let's say you have two courtyards, one is inside within the other. The inner one belongs to her, and the outer one belongs to him. And the outer walls go higher than the inner walls. He throws the get to her, he throws it to that inner chutzner. Once it reaches the airspace, it's surrounded, even though it's only surrounded by the outer walls. It hasn't descended low enough to be within the walls of the inner courtyard. She's considered divorced. My time, what's the reason? Because the inner courtyard itself, it's being protected by the outer walls. The outer walls are considered to be offering protection to the inner chutzner as well. That's considered a secure area when it reaches the airspace of the inner chutzner, even though it's not within the walls of the inner chutzner. Now that's not true when it comes to boxes. Let's say you have two boxes, one within the other. The inner box is hers, and the outer box is his. He throws it to her. Even if it reaches the airspace of the inner box, she's not divorced. My time, and what's the reason? Because it hasn't come to rest. When it comes to boxes, it has to actually come to rest. And the Gemara says, but even if it comes to rest, what's the difference? Why is that considered a divorce? Shouldn't that be a problem that it is the vessels of the lokeach in the rishus of the mocher? And so therefore, that already we discussed earlier. You can't say a case like that. You can't say her kalim are going to acquire if it's in the rishus, if it's in the overall property of the seller, or in this case of the husband. And the Gemara answers, and here what are we dealing with? We're actually talking about a box, but it doesn't have a bottom. So ultimately, it's not coming to rest in the box, so to speak. It's really coming to rest in her own rishus, and therefore it's going to be considered a gerushin. And Rashi explains, when it comes to courtyards, the Gemara said, "B'mechitzas hachitzona kamintera," the inner courtyard is actually protected by the outer walls. Regila l'shtamer, that's normal to use those as a way of security. Hilkach meshubados hein la v'kanu la. Therefore, those walls are really serving her purpose as well. They're considered serving the inner courtyard, and they belong to her in a sense, and therefore she's considered divorced if it is secure, if the get is secure through those walls. Dehalo nach. And then it said, when it comes to the kalim, when it comes to the boxes, so if it doesn't come to rest, she's not divorced. And the point is, according to Rashi, ve'ein mechitzos kli asuyin la'aviron, the walls of a vessel, that's not made for their airspace. Lishmor, those walls don't protect the airspace of the vessel. It's not like a chutzir. De'ein kli asay elo laniach besocha. The purpose of a vessel is for something to actually rest in the vessel, and therefore airspace does not count. It actually has to come to rest in the vessel. But then the Gemara asks, but even if it comes to rest in the vessel, isn't it a problem of kelev shalokeach b'rishos mocher? And to that the Gemara said, she'ein lo shulayim, that it has no bottom. The point over here is that the outer box doesn't have a bottom, and therefore the inner box is actually resting on the ground, so therefore it's not considered a problem of kelev shalokech b'rishos mocher, because technically speaking, that inner box isn't on the surface of the outer box, it's actually resting on the earth. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Beis Shammai Omrim, Beis Shammai say, Poter Adam Ishto Beget Yashin. A man is allowed to use an old get to divorce his wife. Beis Hillel Oshin, Beis Hillel say that is prohibited. Ve'ezeo Get Yashin, what's considered an old get? Kol shenis yachid ima, me'achar shekas vula. Anytime he was in seclusion with her after the get was written for her, meaning if the get was already written, then he goes into seclusion with his wife, that is a Get Yashin. That's going to be a problem according to Beis Hillel. And the Gemara says, B'ma'ikam miflagi. What are they arguing about? What's the machlokas, the root of the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? Beis Shammai savri lo amrin and gezerah shema yomru gita kodem livna. According to Beis Shammai, we don't say that there's a gezerah. Maybe people will say that her get is before the child, meaning to say if they go into seclusion with one another after the get was actually written, then she gets pregnant, she has a child, so people might actually think the get was given first because the date on the get is from when it was written. People will think the get was given first and then they had a child after, even though that wasn't the case. The get was given much later than it was written, but there's a gezerah that people might say Gita Kodem Livna. Beis Shammai does not have that gezerah. He's not worried. Beis Hillel Sabri, Beis Hillel hold Amrinan gezerah Shema Yomru Gita Kodem Livna. No, there is such a gezerah. We have a concern that people will say the get came before the child, and so therefore once the get is written, they can no longer go in seclusion. Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Abba says that Shmuel says Im Nisis Lo Teisei. If she does use the get to get married, even according to Beis Hillel, who say it shouldn't be used, but if she does use it and she remarries, Lo Teisei, she doesn't have to divorce from that second husband. Ve'ika Diamri, there are those that say Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Abba says that Shmuel says Im Nisgarsha, if she's divorced in this fashion, meaning let's say she's divorced with a get yashan and then her husband travels far away to Medina Sayyam, Tinasi lechatchila, she can use such a get lechatchila, she can use that get to remarry, even though you're not supposed to use a get yashan, but if it happens, she can use it. And Rashi says, Gita Kodem Levna, Shema Yisha es haget shenasayim v'shalosh, bein ksiva l'nesina. The point is maybe there'll be a long delay between the writing and the giving of the get. V'yu lo bonim mimenu shel have children, b'soch hazman, during the interim. V'yachar kach yigreshena bo, then he'll use it to divorce. U'liyamim k'shiyishtakach hadavar, then there's going to be years go by, they'll forget what happened. Yiru zman haget, they'll see that the date of the get, Kodem l'leidas haben, was before the child was born. V'yusfurin shenitan lo mishas ksiva, they'll think it was given right when it was written. V'yomrim in apnuya nolad mishagorshav avipegam, they'll say this child must have been born when there was after the divorce already, and that's going to be a pegam on the child. It's going to be a blemish on the child. Again, that was the other version. Let's say a get yashan is used, and then he goes far away, he travels far away. She can use such a get to remarry. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Kasav l'shum malchus sheina hogenes. Let's say he writes the get, but he dates it by the government or by the kingdom. That's not proper. L'shum malchus madai, he uses the kingdom of the years of Madai, L'shum Malchus Yavan, or the Malchus Yavan, the Greeks, Lebinyan Habayis, or he dates it according to the building of the Beis HaMikdash, L'churban Habayis, or he dates it according to the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, Haya b'Mizrach v'Kasa b'Mayrav, he's in the east, he writes it's in the west, b'Mayrav v'Kasa b'Mizrach, he's in the west, he writes that it's in the east. In all of these cases, the get is no good, and let's say she uses such a get to remarry, she marries a second man, so we are strict. Teitze Mizel Mizeh, she has to separate herself from this one and this one, the first husband and the second husband, she can't marry either of them. Utzricha get mizel mizeh, she needs a get from both of them. Ve'ein lo ksuba v'lo peiros v'lo mezonos v'lo belos lo alzeh v'lo alzeh. She has no claim of ksuba or peiros or mizoners, or belos, which refers to clothing. She has no claims against either husband. Im natla mizeh mizeh taxer, if she takes from this one or from this one, she has to return anything she takes. V'havlad mamzer mizeh mizeh, if she has a child from either one, the child is considered a mamzer. V'lo zev ezem mitamin lo, neither one of them is allowed to be mitame. Let's say we're talking about a kohen who normally can be mitame to his wife. Here, that is not the case. V'lo zev ezeh zakohen, and neither husband is able to get lo b'mitziyasa, can't get anything that she finds. It's not considered a wife, where normally if the wife finds something, it goes to the husband. V'lo b'maaseh yodeh, they're not entitled to her earnings. V'lo b'afaras nedareh, they're not entitled to annul her vows. Haisa bas Yisrael, let's say she was a Jewish girl, a bas Yisrael, nifselas min hakuna, she would now become disqualified from kahuna, from marrying a kohen. And Rashi explains, Kasav l'shem malchus she'ena hogenis, if he writes it according to the dating of a kingdom that's not proper, meaning Mishaya b'Bavel, let's say he's in Bavel, v'kasav b'shnas kach v'kach l'malchus acheres, and he says it's year so-and-so for this other kingdom. And that's going to be considered ein hogenis. The Gemara mefarish amai kari lo shein hogenis. The Gemara will explain why that's called not proper. Oshakasva l'shem madai v'chulu. Again, he writes it according to madai. So in these cases, l'fi shetzarach lichtov l'shem malchus shenichtav bo. He always has to write according to the government where it was written. Kedem mefarish b'Gemara, as will be explained in the Gemara. Oshakasva l'binya abayas or l'chorbanu pasal. He dates it according to the building or the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. B'vnei shelo kasav l'shem malchus. Again, it's not written according to the local government. Teitze mizeh, in these cases were strict. She has to divorce both husbands. Im nisus beget zeh, if she were to use such a get to remarry, teitze min harishon umin hasheni. She needs to divorce. She has to separate herself from the first and second. Utzricha get sheni min harishon. She'll need another get from the first husband because that wasn't a good get. V'get min hasheni. She'll need a get from the second husband. V'afal pisha kiddush sheni lo have a kiddushin. Now you might say, but the second marriage is not a marriage because she's still married to the first person. So says Rashi, even though that second kiddushin is not a kiddushin, still. Yavamas mafarish time, in Yavamas they explain the reason why she needs a divorce from the second husband if it was never a marriage in the first place. Gezeira shemayomru giresh rishon get gomor v'nosa sheni v'nimtzas eishasish yotze below get. It's a gezeira that people will say maybe the first one was a full divorce and then there was the second person married her, so people will think that she actually is married to the second husband and they'll think that she was a married woman who was able to be divorced without a get, and so therefore we require a get from the second husband. And Rashi continues, v'lo peiros din peiros. What we refer to by peiros is the halacha that has to do with peiros, with the fruits, meaning shetiknu lo leisha pirkona mishaveh atachas peiros. The halacha is that the wife is entitled to be redeemed by the husband. Let's say the wife is taken captive, he has to redeem her. And why is that true? That's in exchange for peiros. V'al elu ein la klum. Here there is no halacha like that. There's no halacha of peiros. There's no halacha of pirkona, of redeeming her. V'lo belos, and also when it comes to the garments, hakayamim mi begadim sheichnisalo, that's talking about she brings into the marriage her own clothing, so that she doesn't get either. Uknasu de kansua, that's a fine against her. Kedem mefarish b'Yavamas, as is explained in Yavamas, the boy lo akruyu legita, because she should have read the get, she should have made sure that it was proper. V'havlad mamzer mizah mizah, any children from either husband is considered a mamzer. In mechzira harishon, let's say she goes back to the first husband, v'yolda lo ben, has a child, have a mamzer midrabanan, that would be the status of a mamzer on a derabanan level. Uv'Yavamas amrin and da'asur b'mamzeres hoel v'kashem in haTorah. And in Yavamas we say that that's not a real mamzer on a doraisa level, so such a child would be only a mamzer on a derabanan level. So such a child would actually not allowed to be married, would not allowed to marry a mamzeres, even though normally a mamzer can marry a mamzeres. But here he's just a mamzer midrabanan, so he can't marry a mamzeres since midoraisa he's not a mamzer. Mitamin law, they're also not allowed to be mitame to her. Again, they're not considered her husband. Em kohanim him if they are kohanim. Nifselis min hakuna, and she's also disqualified from marrying a Kohen. The zona, she has the status of a zona, again, because she used an improper get to remarry. The stam zona hainu eishas ish shemazana tachas bala lacherim. And a zona generally is a married woman who's with others while she's married. The hainu nafkas bara, that's what we refer to as nafkas bara. She marries outside. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Pei Amud Aleph.